So you guys, we're almost an hour and a half. How much more time do you guys actually have?
I got time.
What about you,
It's
Amos?
fine. Yeah, I'm
Okay,
good.
wanna just kind of keep on going for a bit, and
Yeah,
Yeah.
we'll hit the 2 hours. I think we could do that
well,
easily.
yeah, sure. Okay, sounds good. Well, so let's kind of move.
Are we talking current events? Are we doing the Roe v.
Let's
Wade? We didn't touch on that. That could be like
well,
spicy.
let's kind of dive into that one. Maybe if you wanted to, we can talk Ukraine, I guess, because because there was no 10K Run podcast when that was a whole thing.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
if you want,
missed out.
do you want to start with the Roe versus Wade or?
I mean,
Sure.
again, this has nothing to do with the UK, but for some reason we have protests, and I mean,
Really?
again, yeah, we have protests. I have the protests in Trinidad and Tobago over Roe v. Wade, and most people don't even understand what the ruling
Yeah,
actually was. Now, I'm not any kind of legal, scholar,
sure.
but the basic argument came down that, for anybody who doesn't know, right, you've got the three branches of the United States government. You've got legislature, executive, and the judiciary. The laws are supposed to come through the legislature, either local government or at the national level, and the role of the Supreme Court is to interpret the laws in light of the Constitution to say whether it holds up or not. What ended up happening with Roe v. Wade is taking, what is it, the 14th Amendment on the right to privacy, and they use that to branch in the idea that included medical health and the privacy towards an abortion. It's an interpretation. There's no wording.
And,
The word abortion
yeah.
doesn't show up.
And constitutionality merely is just what is allowed. It doesn't necessarily mean if
Correct.
it's legal or not.
Also
Because
correct.
making something legal is different from deeming something constitutional.
Constitutional.
Hmm.
Correct.
It's like so it's basically, here's this
Divorce.
bubble of it's this bubble of the difference between what is legal and illegal, but then what's constitutional is what's in the bubble.
Right.
And then, of course, rulings are like determining, like, essentially the shape or the scope of that bubble. And because Roe v. Wade was just a shaky ruling at best, like, a lot of people were talking about, like, it could be overturned for a variety of reasons. Now, was that a statement to say you were, like, not pro-choice? Like, I think Brooke and we've talked about, we're, like, fairly pro-choice. Like, granted,
Rare, but pro-choice. Yeah.
right, it's like,
I think people
it's-
say safe, legal, and rare.
Legal and rare.
that's
yeah,
right.
and it's like I think, on the one hand, the U.S. in terms of the Western world takes the lead in abortions.
Undoubtedly.
That seems to be the case. Yeah.
Second to China during the
And-
one-child policy.
Yeah, and that's why I'm prefacing the Western world.
Yeah.
And then from that, then it's kind of like, obviously I don't believe in like restrictions or rules or laws that restrict like how people live their lives. But there's obviously consequences to having access to things. For us basically turning abortion into sort of a right instead of something you actively go, like, yes, you should, there's an ease of doing it, and I think you should have that access. But to get into the situation where you need one, and how it's just so easily, you look at the statistics, you look at how often it's done, how many of them have been done, even with just all the contraceptives and all the best practices we know today, in the middle of all the like the shitty sex ed we have in the U.S., we somehow still know better. We still have this thing of like everyone's getting one. And we're further divided than ever on the issue. Like I told some people, most people are pretty reasonable on it, but we've sort of fueled up the narrative. Like I told someone, I said, I think the argument of life begins at conception on one side and abortion all the way up to 9 months,
Or beyond in some cases.
Mhm.
are equally as unreasonable, I think.
Yeah.
Because if Plan B is now abortion, but the difference between personhood and not personhood is a C-section, we're not really talking. There's a reason.
We're not speaking the same language.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, before we get into the nuance, just because a lot of
Yeah.
people don't understand what's happened, right? So the Roe v. Wade was a decision of interpreting the Constitution to give
Yep.
abortion constitutional protection in the United States.
Yep.
So the decision by the recent ruling to overturn it has nothing to do with making abortions illegal in the United States.
Exactly.
What it's doing, it's correcting the decision from the judiciary that's not supposed to be legislating from the bench. There's nothing within the Constitution or the historical precedents of the culture in the United States that says the Constitution protects abortion. It's not a right that's enshrined within the document. That's all it does. And it returns that power to the states and the local legislatures. And they knew this was a problem. Because even Barack Obama, part of his campaign was to codify Roe v. Wade, to actually push legislation through the House and the Senate to the desk and make it national law. Biden is now threatening the same thing. The Democrats have had, I don't know how long they've been in power now.
Years.
Yeah, well, they haven't been in power that long, but they've had the opportunity to do it, haven't done it. So a lot of people are under the impression that the overturning means it's now illegal. Now, I think there are 13 states that have trigger laws, basically saying that once Roe v. Wade is overturned, it does become illegal, or at least there's serious restrictions.
Either immediately or in the
or within a time, correct.
Yeah.
So the way I've understood this overturning, basically, so let me tell me if I've gotten this right or wrong. It basically defederalizes the act, and basically, so what does it mean for like taxes going to organizations like Planned Parenthood, that kind of thing? So are those being curtailed now?
So I mean, I don't know the full details, but in some states, so I think Mississippi was the first. It's now illegal in Mississippi.
Okay.
I think Mississippi had like a 150-year law basically saying that abortion was illegal. It was struck down with Roe v. Wade. But the minute Roe v. Wade was overturned, that law came back into effect. And they were the first. I think Texas is the other. They're probably, I don't know if they've done it yet or not. But basically, every state can now decide what they want to do. So in a place like California, right, you could be aborted up to the age of 18 probably, you know, as as crazy as it sounds. Mm-hmm. In other more conservative states, it's probably going to be something different. Now, I agree with Amos. I think a lot of them, they have a time scale, so they can't just like knock it out immediately. In some states, it's going to be different. And now it has to go through the people. The people, through their elections, referendums, and other things, they're now going to push it forward.
Right.
So we get these memes of all these women basically demanding vasectomies before they go on a date because there's no safe way to have sex. Yeah, exactly. You know, I mean, even in Trinidad, right? The meme of, you know, there's like the Handmaid's Tale picture at the top, and they say, oh, this is what they expected, and then you got like the warrior princesses at the bottom, being like, this is what's going to happen. Of course, none of that fucking happens. Yeah. This is all bullshit.
Well, sure, yeah. So one thing I wanted to, sorry to interrupt, but you know, so what I'm getting about this and all this virtue signaling that's coming out of the people who are freaking out about all these women are going to die because Roe v. Wade is overturned because they can't get abortions supposedly. Well, here's the problem. We're talking about tax funding those things, and what's more, we're talking about men ultimately being the ones actually paying those taxes in the grand scheme of things. So those people are basically screeching about men not paying for their own problems. That's kind of how it strikes like to me. Yeah.
What a lot of people miss is that abortion is actually a very good thing for men who do not want to take responsibility. So there is a men's rights side to this as well, and I've always supported, if you're going to have abortion, men should have the right to opt out of fatherhood as well. You know, the financial abortion.
The paper abortion. The paper abortion. Correct. That's what they call it.
Right. Yeah, exactly. They should not be forced to pay for the 18 years of child support and stuff like that. So that's, you know, I would have taken that position if that was fair. But what you're talking about, it has to be determined individually. So obviously the state funding of Planned Parenthood is now off the table. But abortions have been taking place in doctors' offices for years. Right, I come from Trinidad and Tobago. Abortion is illegal, okay. And the reason I'm not entirely in favor of making it completely illegal is because we have entire wings of our general hospital filled with women with botched abortions, and many times the mothers die. Right, so yes, they may have done it, but they've taken some drug or a clothes hanger or whatever they've done, and they've bled out and they've died. And like you say, it should be safe, legal, and rare. The problem comes from the culture in the United States, where it's basically seen as a form of contraception, which is never what it's really been pushed to be. We have other methods of contraception.
Right.
They're
less of a hassle than getting one. Yeah, right. Ironically enough.
Exactly. So if you take out, and I don't have the exact statistics, but if you take out, okay, incest, rape, medical risk to the mother, 3% of abortions at most. At most. So first of all, anybody coming to you with rape, incest, and stuff like that to argue for the other 97% don't really give a shit about this issue because they're just special pleading. You could then turn around and be like, okay, let's put that aside and be like, okay, we agree on that. And I think that's where Amos and myself are kind of like, yeah, totally. Within a certain time frame, if these are the things, sure. Let's discuss the other 97 that are doing it out of inconvenience or basically treating it like contraception.
No reason given.
And even like the majority of just abortions, period, happen within the first trimester, which, and for a lot of like more left-leaning individuals or people who are trying to talk about like compare us to other countries, in Europe,
correct,
pretty much a limit, like no abortions past the first trimester, 12, 16 weeks,
12,
somewhere
16
in there.
weeks.
Which, because medically it makes sense, like that's when most complications are happening. If the baby's making it into second, third trimester, complications become exceedingly, like they still happen, but it's like over 90% of the complications aren't happening anymore. And at that point, it's just like, and it's it's well more formed. Like people want to talk heartbeat, brain function, and stuff like that. You could have that conversation, but mainly, most of the issues are happening in the first trimester. And that makes the most sense. And again, of course, like you go past, most people are agreeing past that, it gets trickier. Like it's, for a lot of people's feelings, it's more of a person, I guess. But
I mean, it's a good shift though in terms of the politics.
Yeah.
While the issue is controversial, and it's Justice Thomas definitely opened the door to a lot of other bench decisions from the judiciary, such as gay marriage, for instance, or even interracial marriage. These were also interpreted through constitutional means, never passed through legislation. But nonetheless, we don't know if those doors are going to be opened. But it took the power, and yeah, could be. But it actually put the pressure. It actually corrected what should have been done by the legislature and the local governments. So the libertarians really should be like, yeah, we shouldn't be legislating from the bench. We have to go through due process, and we need to do this correctly.
Well, I mean,
I don't know if they are.
I mean, the real libertarian position is there's no government involved in that whatsoever.
Sure.
Right.
So if there's interracial marriage, gay marriage, abortion, that's all just individuals to make their own decision. Like,
I mean, the debate then would become a bit complicated. I've seen libertarians kind of split down the middle on this one, whether the fetus actually constitutes that individual. And I think, in consideration in this situation in which there are two individuals' rights that are kind of in conflict, basically. I think Justin Amash actually did a tweet basically kind of nuancing this thing, that since that there are two separate rights on the line, you can't just dismiss it one way or another and just like hard one way, hard the other way, that kind of thing. You have to kind of go ahead, Amos.
That's the thing is like, so prior to the National Convention in Reno, the Libertarian Party had a plank, which is another word for like a part of the platform, that said, basically they said, we believe both sides of the argument have, argued in good faith, have good points, the pro-life and the pro-choice side. However, we believe that the government should be completely removed from the problem, and it should be left up to individuals and like their medical professionals, doctors. Which I think, I mean, if you read it plainly, would you think that's a pro-life or pro-choice leaning statement?
Well, here's the thing. Like, if I were to read right into that in the mindset I have now, like, it's like, leave it to the individual, but what is the operation? So then the debate becomes, is it to terminate something that is not an individual, or is it an individual that you would be, in effect, killing by your own hand? So that
includes the medical professional
Yeah.
side, so that you can make
They
an
have to
informed
decide.
decision.
Yeah.
And
So,
So
no,
this is-
the crux on that would be if the person wants the abortion, but the medical practitioner decides not to do it, and that's where you're going to create the conflict.
yeah, so then
You can't force the medical practitioner.
yeah, you can't make
Right.
a gay wedding
Yeah.
cake.
You can't make the gay
Ex-
red.
oh my god, that wedding cake thing. No,
So
that
this is that conversation, and it's like they're like in a very libertarian sort of scenario, you would have doctors that just refuse to
Don't
perform
wanna do it.
abortions,
right.
and that should be respected because there's no government to force them to do that.
Right. This is what I've heard referred to as negative rights versus positive rights. Basically.
Right.
Yeah. Right. So.
And so then, but then, like when I'm looking, and maybe this is a tactic some people use. When I hear the word pro-choice, I'm like conservatives like to say, well, of course we're pro-choice. We're pro every other choice except for abortion. Whereas I'm looking at because life is a choice, adoption is a choice, having the
Having
baby.
sex is a choice. Yeah.
And exactly too. I mean, in the world we're in, I can understand the argument, just saying, abstinence is the way is not practical.
Sex strike.
Yeah, and I'm sitting here
Come on.
like, you want to have a sex strike? That's just, I guess it's just called being responsible.
It's gotta be not indiscriminate. That's it.
Well, here's the thing. Even if you weren't into the whole abstinence thing, you could still. There's no better time to exercise said autonomy to make sure you're taking every precaution. But I think the fact is that this is something that could lead to something that's in a natural trajectory of what will become an individual. And I think my thing is that's what I want more value placed in, because in any other context, if there were miscarriages, you would call the result basically a corpse, right? So if it was a corpse, what was it before? Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, the next step, then I think you get into the again, the ideal libertarian view would just be, dang it, I lost my train of thought again.
It's probably because I interrupted.
We gotta move to Lieberland and see what they do out there, right? The whole free state and stuff.
It's just you.
I mean, what you hit on, V, is exactly the point, right?
Yeah.
It's determines at what point is this an individual, and that's going to vary for everybody. I think something I saw that was very disturbing. I think there was a picture at one of the protests, and the woman was well past her first trimester. She was like, and you could see written on her stomach, "Not a human yet."
That's what I saw. And there was another one I saw with a bunch of kids saying, "Would you wish this on, or something like that, like say as if the kids are burdens or something like that. They're holding signs. If you,
and no, I think that's absolutely disgusting. But at the same time, I'm not in their mindset. I don't have their very twisted, I think, thinking. That doesn't give me the right to necessarily impose my view on them, which is, of course, this is where the argument is. And nobody's going to answer this question. At what point is it a life, a viable life, a human?
Yeah.
There is no answer to that question.
Yeah. The ironic thing. Go ahead, Amos.
I just remembered now. Basically, yeah. It's just I'm thinking the ideal would then just be where, libertarians that are having an issue with this are basically seeing it as now abortions are not constitutionally included. Basically, it's not. Whereas, if you really talk it down with a libertarian, they're not believing in the tax dollars should be funding it. They'll agree on that. Yeah, you shouldn't have to pay for someone else's abortion because that's the whole taxation and stuff thing. And of course, also you shouldn't be forcing doctors to perform the procedure either. So the ideal would then be doctors are totally free to perform them, to not perform them, and anyone can get them or not get them. And there shouldn't be any government institution directly funding that. Or at least not on a scale where, my $1 here is funding an abortion halfway across the country over there. If you're in a community the ideal community of like libertarians that agree we're going to put some money aside because we want to we don't want people just popping out. We want some health care put aside for people in case something happens. Maybe that community has a couple abortions or something for legitimate reasons. Yeah, you're free to do that, but that's only if it's consensual.
I would take. Yeah, go ahead.
One thing I tell people when I just as an opener to like talking about libertarianism, I said, did you know that there's your tax dollars are funded to go do things in other places that you don't necessarily agree with? Well, yeah, that's in general. Everyone would say yeah. And I could say, if you're a conservative, your money is funding abortions. If you're someone who's more left-leaning, your money is funding wars or drug war, a lot of things. Putting people in jail for trumped-up charges or something. Like, you could talk about all this. Same thing with, that's how I explain away taxes. Well, you should be knowing exactly where your dollars are spent. So if a conservative doesn't believe his abortion is okay, do you think his tax dollars should be funding it? Well, but really, think about it. Well, okay, do you think your dollars should go fund things he cares about? Well, no. It's like
make it voluntary. So you want to fund this, and this, and
yeah, you want to fund abortion.
Never going to happen, but
right. Which is why more decentralized, lower level communities, cities, and counties is more favorable than to sort of a large centralized government. Yeah. Anyway, sorry. Go ahead, Brooke.
I was just going to touch on the cultural differences. So what the American I guess culture surrounding abortion, it's viewed as a form of contraception, and we're seeing that. I watched some post on one of these men's groups of some guy who went and got a vasectomy because he wants to stand up with women. He's like 23, he's like, just absolute. The mind virus is absolutely sickening. Mm-hmm. And I blame Twitter, I blame TikTok, that internet culture, shock value, all that nonsense going on. You contrast that with the Japanese, going to like a cultural. I think they're kind of like civilizational culture that's kind of rising at the moment. Russia's doing the same thing. They have abortions as well, but what surrounds it is a completely different culture. They do a funeral. There's mourning. They do they go to the shrine. They do the incense for the child, and they treat it as if this was a fellow Japanese person that was missed, and that was something that's kind of rooted into the culture. So while I agree with Amos in the sense that nobody should be forced to do anything either, I would differ with the libertarians in a sense that we should be promoting healthy choices. So again, valuing human life is something important. Encouraging families to get married, raising children in a two-parent household should be encouraged. The things that actually benefit a society, and we all know the statistics on single moms and the outcomes of the kids and this state-sponsored single motherhood and all this other kinds of stuff. So where I would disagree in some degree with the libertarians is, yes, it is freedom, but I think at the same time we should be encouraging healthy lifestyles. And on issues like abortion and other things, most of us have stepped away from it on a cultural aspect, where we don't value life. It's basically seen as contraception. We need to try and help instill a different view of that. I don't think that'll happen in the West, but it can happen.
And that's part of the whole body autonomy view. And what's tricky now, so you can what you just said. What I noticed, and this is there's good and bad to it. The whole mask thing, I definitely was seeing okay, there's a certain point where it's I haven't worn a mask in a while.
They want to bring it back here in Wales.
There's places that I've seen where they still have the mask sign up, or there's places where they've made the social distancing guideline sort of a permanent fixture in the building. It's not a sticker, but it's it was a placard. You have placards of handicap parking, or we have these things, right? And it was one was social distancing. I'm it's a real weird thing when you see it as a placard instead of a sticker. And what I saw among libertarians was there was a split too on libertarians that obviously just about every libertarian I knew on either side understood mandates were not in line with our principles. But what it turned into was people would shame libertarians that got the vaccine. Some libertarian would just follow the trend of posting a picture of like their little band-aid after they got the vaccine, and everyone would shame them. Oh, you bought into it, and was like, well, no, I believe it works, and I made a decision, and I feel I'm informed enough to make the decision.
I'd have to comment on the fact that he is showing it off, and that kind of
Right. But consider the fact that like normies can exist as libertarians too. So if everyone's just jumping on a trend instead of really just trying to virtue signal, like the virtue signal is the trend, yeah. But like if so many people are doing it, so like it's like TikToks, right? There's stupid TikTok challenges people are doing. If a libertarian did it, I wouldn't be any more surprised than if a conservative or a liberal or whatever did it too. It's just what people do. We want to feel included. So when a libertarian would post a picture of getting the vaccine or whatever, they get shamed. And then if there's libertarian, but then equally, there'd be libertarians like, I'm not getting the vaccine. And people are like, yeah, good for you. Like, it's virtue signaling in another way too. Or now, anyone, like I'll see libertarians that will dogpile a picture or someone they know that wore a mask somewhere. Oh, what are you doing? We're still wearing a mask. Well, I want like if my friend Spike still wore a mask because he didn't get COVID yet or something, or his doctor, right? Like I've talked to him about it too, and he talks about like in his condition, he's talked to doctors and stuff, and he'll follow their advice, if he feels it's like, yeah, that makes sense, or I've known him well enough to trust them. And people will dogpile like, you're wearing a mask, or why aren't you wearing a mask on an airplane? It's like, you can make your own decisions.
I mean, to be fair, that's on every issue these days, right?
But I mean, that's that bodily autonomy. It's like, if you want to make a decision that the general public doesn't like or likes, and you're not hurting anyone, who gives a shit?
Yeah, but to be fair, like, you guys have watched Kenobi. I don't know.
Yeah.
V, have you watched Kenobi? No, good man.
No.
Yeah.
I have.
Smart man. Right. And I'm probably with V on this, right? I'm not watching this bullshit because I knew exactly what was going to happen. I knew that the character of Reva, it's going to be her show. It's all, the girl that's the key to everything, representation and the message and all that good stuff.
It'll be Picard over again.
It's going to be Picard all over again, right? Sheer fucking humorous.
Kenobi, though. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, right. It's going to be The Last Jedi.
No.
Rise of Skywalker. But that's it. You can't even have legitimate criticisms of the show, right? Even if you don't want to buy into the message and the virtue signaling, the representation, and all that kind of stuff. The main character, one of the main characters, Reva, is a woman of color, is a black woman. She's the Inquisitor, all that kind of stuff. Before the show even came out, before it even launched. If you don't like this character, you're racist. Oh, you're just a bad person. Even if the character is written poorly, she might be a fantastic actress, but if the story is shit, the dialogue she's given to work with is garbage, it's not her fault. You can't legitimately criticize the character anymore. So just to be fair, everything is hyper-polarized. Everything is hyper-politicized. You can't have an opinion on anything.
Right.
And I think that's the culture.
Sure. One comment I want to make on this culture versus maybe even as back as the 90s. So, so a bit of an anecdote here. One of my favorite movies of all time is Heavyweights, right?
Right.
Yeah. And I was in Japan when I was getting really into this movie when I was a little kid, right? Like, and Japan is basically, race is not really something you think about if you grew up in the culture, right? It's like, as we discussed, there is the whole racism thing, but that's more something understood when you're an adult, I suppose, And of course, I've had my own share of struggles in school for being biracial, but beside the point, like when I was looking at American film, like I didn't even think about who was what race, because there were white guys, there were Kenan Thompson's a black guy, there's a black person here or there. Like, everybody kind of just, it's not something you just think about, it's just like, this is the Americans, and they come in all kinds of things. You just don't think about this kind of stuff, but now we're making a point to try and say that this is, this is what it is, and we're making a statement, and you're a bigot if you don't, liking anything about this black woman. You know.
For me at least, like the one of the shows they're not. I'm not watching anything from Star Wars anymore. I think The Mandalorian was the last thing I watched. And I couldn't do it anymore. Which was good. The second season was fantastic, but I knew where it was going with the Book of Boba Fett and other things. So I was talking to Amos about, he watched it. And I have a neighbor who watched it as well, big Star Wars fan. And he basically came out pissed, and he and I had the conversation. And I was telling Amos, look, there are a couple of shows that Sorry?
For Kenobi.
Yeah, watching for Kenobi, yeah. So there are a couple of shows that I am watching. I'm watching The Boys. Now, The Boys is filled with the political anecdotes and all of the, kind of right-wing stereotypes and the left wing, and the left wing is all great. But the show started that way. The show came from that direction from the go. So this was the universe that it was in. So even though it is speaking to those stereotypes, it fits with the whole show. The Umbrella Academy is another one that I've watched. And I will admit, Elliot Page, or what's his name? I can't remember. Elaine Page, now Elliot Page, they brought that story into the show, right? So she played the character of Vanya, and now there's a transition scene. Spoilers, I'm sorry, too late. Spoilers came out. And I would admit, the minute they did that, I almost turned it off. It's because I knew it's the message.
They maintained the story.
They maintained the story, but it's not quite like the comics. I actually know the comic. Close enough. But it became forced. It kept kind of pulling me out of the show a little bit. And my issue, and this is what I was going to touch on, it's the death of the art of acting. If you can no longer play a character that you are not, you're no longer acting. And that's what this cultural, attack and appropriation and all this other stuff is doing. And it's a disservice to people. Like you were saying, V, when you were in Japan and you watched the show and you're watching an American, a white person, a black person, whatever, it taught you that this is just how it is. It taught you that the whole idea of the representation is actually counterproductive to inclusion, because I have to see my face. I can't connect with a non-me looking face. And that's the subtle racism behind this representation message.